Alright guys, welcome back. Yesterday we worked on how to find all these zeros. Yesterday every problem we did actually worked nicely, where I was able to look at the graph and I could find them all. Today we're going to talk about what happens when you can't find all of them on the graph. Okay, so looking here at this first problem, it is x to the fourth, so I know I should have 4 answers. All right, knowing that, looking at my graph, I can see a nice answer at -1, and I can see a nice answer at 2. So I only have 2 of the answers that I need, so I'm missing 2 of them. Okay, I can't go by normal factoring methods because this problem has 5 terms. I don't know how to factor something with 5 terms. So when we're at a point where we don't have all of the answers, I can't just factor it. We have to look at the graph, find the ones I can, and kind of go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my synthetic. Let's see, I have x to the fourth, x to the third, x squared, x to the first, constant. So nothing's missing. So 1 for x to the fourth, -1 for x to the third, 1 for x squared, -3 for the x, -6 for my constant. All right, looking here, I have my first 0, or my first answer, is -1. So using that one, -1 times 1 is -1. If we add, we get -2. Multiply -1 and -2 gives me +2. Add gives me 3. Multiply -1 and 3 is -3. Adding gives me -6. -1 times -6 is +6. And I get a 0. So I know I'm good there. I got the 0 at the end. All right, so this one starts x to the fourth. If I've done synthetic once, I'm down to an x cubed. I want to be at least down to an x squared. If I can get to an x squared, then I can either factor it, or I can use the quadratic formula, or I can use the square root method. I have other options, okay? So we want to make sure you should be able to get everything down to at least an x squared. And I can in this case because I have another answer of a 2. So we'll go ahead and do synthetic again, this time using my 2. So drop down the 1. 2 times 1 is 2. -2 and 2 is 0. 2 times 0 is 0. Add 3 and 0 is 3. Multiply 2 times 3 is 6. And that gives me 0. I know I'm good. So that one worked. So I started x to the fourth, I did synthetic twice, so I'm down to an x squared plus 0x plus 3 equals 0. So now I need to look to solve this. 0x, that's really nothing. So I can look at it as 0, x is gone. So x squared plus 3 equals 0. Okay. Well, I know that's not going to factor, but I can solve this with the square root method, right? So we'll just subtract the 3 to the other side, and then to get rid of the square, we take the square root. So x equals plus or minus, because I took the square root. I know there's an I, because there was a negative, and I can't do anything with the 3. So x equals plus or minus I radical 3, and then I also had -1 and 2. For my answers. So there we go. So plus or minus I radical 3, that's 2 answers, right? Because I have a positive and a negative. I have -1 and 2. So I do have the 4 answers that I knew I should have had from the beginning. Looking at the graph, what happens a lot of times is when you don't see answers, remember we looked at graphs earlier in the school year where the imaginary answers, that's when they did not cross. So you don't see them if they're imaginary. So when we look at a graph like this, and I knew there should have been 4 answers, and I only found 2, then there's probably a really good chance that the other 2 answers were imaginary. All right, number 7. So again, that is a lovely graph zoomed in for us. So this answer here, it's between -1 and -2. So looking at that one, I don't really know what that is. So that's not really going to help me. I can see it crossed here. That's like 2 point something. That's not going to help me. But then what do you notice it did right here at 3? it bounced. So that answer actually shows up twice. So all right, knowing this has 4 answers, and I have 2 of them, I should be able to get this down to an x squared. All right, let's double check. X to the 4th, x to the 3rd, x squared, x to the 1st, constant. Everything's there, nothing's missing. So setting up our synthetic, we have 1, -7, 12, 9, and -27. I will use my answer of 3, drop down the 1. So we multiply and then add. Multiply 3 and -4 gives me -12. Add is 0. Multiply 3 times 0 is 0. Add gives me 9. Multiply 3 times 9 is 27, and that gives me 0. So that one checks out. And if you were like, did it really bounce, and you weren't sure, this will tell you if it did or not. So using the 3 a second time, since it looked like it showed up twice, drop down the 1. 3 times 1 is 3. Adding those gives me -1. Multiply gives me -3. Add is -3. Multiply 3 times -3 is -9, which gives me 0, and it does check out. So I know for a fact that it did bounce. Now, those other 2 answers, are they imaginary? No, they're not imaginary because they cross the x-axis, but they're just not pretty, right? Like a nice answer like 3. So it's either a fraction or a radical or something like that. So I did this synthetic twice. I started x to the 4th. I went twice through here. So that means I am down to an x squared minus 1x minus 3 equals 0. So I need to try to solve this. So looking, my first step I always try to do is the square root method. I have a bx term, so I can't. I try to factor. My only options for c are 1 and 3. That's not going to give me a 1 in the middle. That's not going to factor. So my only other option then to solve is the lovely quadratic formula, which you guys love so much. So negative b is 1 plus or minus square root b squared, so -1 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is -3, all over 2 times a, which is 1. All right, so cleaning that up a little bit. So underneath the radical, oops, are there? We're going to have 1 plus or minus square root. -1 squared minus 4 times 1 times -3 is 13 over 2. I cannot do a factor tree on the 13, so that's not going to give me anything. So that is 2 of my answers. And then I had a 3 and a 3. So there we go. So 1 plus or minus radical 13 over 2, and then 3 and 3. So if you're like, wait a minute, what is that? If you grab your calculator and type that in, 1 plus radical 13 divided by 2, and then do 1 minus the square root of 13 divided by 2, you're going to find you're going to end up with like -1 point something and 2 point something else. Okay, so those are your answers. They're just not pretty. All right, let's try another one. So number 8. Again, how many answers does this one have? It's going to have 4. So looking at my graph, it looks like I have a nice answer at -2, and it looks like I have a nice answer at 1. I only have 2 answers. I'm supposed to have 4. So we set up synthetic. We have x to the 4th, x cubed, x squared, x to the 1st, constant. Nothing's missing. All right, so we have 1. That's a 1. Oh, let's erase that. That got bad. Sorry. All right, so 1, 1, 2, 4, -8. Using my first answer here, again, it doesn't matter which one. So we drop down the 1. Multiply -2 and 1 is -2. Add gives me -1. Multiply -2 and -1 is a +2. Adding that is 4. Multiply -2 times 4 is -8. Add is -4. Multiply -2 and -4 gives me 8, and there's my 0, so I know that it did work. All right, I started x to the 4th, I did synthetic, I'm down to x cubed. I need to get it at least to x squared, if not further. So let's use our other answer of 1. Multiply is 1, add is 0, 1 times 0 is 0, add those is 4, 1 times 4 is 4, adding gives me a 0, so I know that one worked as well. All right, I started x to the 4th, I did synthetic twice, so I'm down to an x squared plus 0x plus 4 equals 0. All right, I need to solve this. So factoring is not going to work. I can't get that to factor to give me a 0 in the middle. I can use, since there technically is no b term, I really have x squared plus 4 equals 0. I can use the square root method. So x squared equals, we'll subtract the 4 to the other side, square root of both sides. I took the square root, so it's plus or minus, and the square root of -4 is going to be 2i, and then I also had answers of -2, I found from my graph, and 1. So the plus or minus 2i, those are imaginary. That's why we do not see the graph crossing anywhere else. Imaginary answers do not cross the x-axis. So the only real ones I had were -2 and 1. Okay, but altogether, 4 answers, just like it said at the beginning, because it was x to the 4th. I have all 4. 2 imaginary, -2, and 1. One last problem, almost done for today. So find all the zeros of the function. Oh, this one is an x to the 5th. I should have 5 answers. So let's see, how many does the graph give me? I can see here it bounced off of -1. So then I know -1 is an answer twice. And it looks like it crossed nicely at 2. All right, so looking through x to the 5th, 4th, 3rd, squared, x to the 1st, constant. Everything's there for my synthetic, making sure they're all in order. All right, so I have a 1, -4, 4, 10, -13, and -14. All right, I'm going to go ahead and use my first one, -1. Drop that down. So we'll do our synthetic. We multiply, and then we'll add. Multiply -1 and -5 is a +5. Add gives me 9. Multiply -1 and 9 is -9. Add gives me 1. Multiply -1 and 1 is -1. Add gives me -14. Multiply -1 and -14 is +14, and that gives me the 0. So I know -1 is a good answer. All right, moving on to the next one. We're going to try the -1, since it looks like it bounced. Drop that one down. -1 times 1 is -1. Adding gives me -6. Multiply -1 and -6 is +6. Add is 15. Multiply -1 times 15 is -15. Adding gives me -14. And then multiply gives me +14 and gives me the 0 that I want. All right, so that one worked. And let's go on with the third one here. So using the 2, drop that down. Multiply 2 times 1 is 2. Add is -4. Multiply 2 times -4 is -8. Add is +7. And then multiply 2 times 7 is 14, and that gives me the 0. All right, so plugging our variables back in. We started x to the 5th, did synthetic 1, 2, 3 times, 5 minus 3, so I'm down to an x squared minus 4x plus 7 equals 0. All right, so I know the square root method is out because there is a b term. Factoring, options for 7 is just 1 and 7. That's never going to give me the 4 in the middle, so it does not factor. which means I have to use quadratic formula. So x equals negative b is 4 plus or minus square root b squared, so negative 4 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 7, all over 2 times a. So we have to clean up underneath our radical. So doing some mental math here, that's going to give me 16 minus 28, which is negative 12 underneath my radical. So I know an I comes out of that. And then factor tree is going to give me 2 and 6, 2 and 3. So I have a pair of 2's. So moving over here to the side, sorry, ran out of space. We have 4 plus or minus. We get a pair of 2's, I have an I have a leftover 3, all over 2. And then I always know to simplify, all 3 numbers can be divided by 2. So we get x equals 2 plus or minus 1i, or just I, radical 3, all over 1, which I don't need. And then we also had negative 1, and 2. So we should have 5 answers. So looking through here, 2 plus or minus I radical 3, that's 2 answers. Well, negative 1, and 2. So I have 5 answers. Notice 2 of them are imaginary. And the imaginary ones do not cross the x-axis. So that shouldn't have come as a shock that those ended up being imaginary. All right, guys, if you have any questions, let me know. You can always go back, rewatch the video. But again, this is my favorite section, so I am happy to go over things with you. If you have other questions, I love to see how all the math kind of comes together right here at the end of this. It is awesome. So any other questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will talk to you guys tomorrow.